I would also like to thank Ankit Kanodia and SmartSync Services for giving me this opportunity, and would also like to thank Mr. Mundra for taking out the time and having this conversation with us on a weekend. So I believe before taking a deeper dive into the business of natural capsule, I think it will be in the best interest of everyone to go through the basics first. So sir, if you can explain the difference between manufacturing API through synthesis route versus manufacturing APIs through a fermentation route. I mean, if you can explain in terms of the time taken to manufacture, the materials used, the cost incurred in putting up manufacturing facilities for these two, and the kind of technical know-how which is required to manufacturing APIs via both these routes, it will be very helpful, sir.
Yeah, so fermentation per se is more challenging. It's a longer duration and a costlier route as compared to chemical synthesis route. However, fermentation route provides those kind of solutions which are difficult for synthesis routes to accomplish. The fermentation is basically nothing but a microbe-mediated bioconversion of a starting material using suitable nutrients. This is how we can define the fermentation process. Fermentation, like any other science, is fast evolving, and continuous R&D is the only way to remain competitive. The technical know-how needs to be developed internally, and you have to work like walking on a treadmill in a continuous R&D to remain competitive.
That's, I think, really helpful. Now, sir, a related question to that, if we look at the history of, Indian pharmaceutical companies, we have not had, material success in manufacturing APIs using the fermentation route, be it regulatory challenges which we have had in the past, or be it the, cost competitive nature of Chinese fermentation APIs. I believe 70 odd percent of fermentation APIs currently are imported from China and India. So now that the government has shown a lot of commitment through the PLI scheme, multiple companies are showing a lot of seriousness towards putting up API manufacturing facilities through fermentation route, including us. So what are your thoughts on the future of this business, keeping in mind the history where we have struggled to manufacture APIs through fermentation, as well as keeping in mind the low cost competitive nature of China?
So it won't be wrong to, if I can say that India was ahead of China in fermentation industry right up to 1990s. I think it's the post 90s Chinese entry into WTO that enabled their access to worldwide markets. And the proactive approach of the Chinese government, large scale fermentation plants came up there, which started producing APIs at very competitive costs. The encouragement they received in form of export subsidies, the low cost of capital there, the better and common infrastructure, common effluent treatment plants, huge investments in R&D facilities from the government help these companies to outbeat many of the Indian players in those days. For example, vitamin C, the Penji plant. There were many, those companies were supported. Like Penji was basically an input material for all the penicillin-based antibiotics. And it was Government of India's proactive approach that they encouraged four such players back in 90s. And all those four players died the natural death once Chinese started dumping that. Maybe because of better technology, better output, or whatever the lower cost of production they had in those days. But now the situation is changing. Post-COVID, most of the countries out of China are realizing that import dependency for essential APIs could cause severe shortages. Like, for example, during COVID period, we had a shortage of dexamethasone, which was one of the drug prescribed for most of the patients. Prednisolone, methyl prednisolone injections were prescribed. So prednisolone went short. So when they are mostly needed, and the shortages at those point of time will create problem for the local government and the citizens. So that is how they thought that these are local manufacturing should be encouraged, and they are needed. So Government of India, immediately after COVID, started announcing PLI scheme. The first PLI scheme was for bulk drugs and medical devices, announced in the March of 2020, the month in which the COVID lockdown started. First lockdown started. The incentive announced in the PLI scheme basically gives some sort of cushioning to the players selected against possible unhealthy competition. That's our thought process. Meanwhile, I would say that the cost of production for APIs in China has also been on the rise due to various factors. There are also stricter anti-pollution laws have appeared in last many 5-6 years. Most of the industrial units which were nearer to the urban areas have been asked to relocate to far-flung places, increasing manpower costs there, of course, due to higher standard of living. So these many reasons have also increased cost of production in China. So my industry understanding is that the new industries coming up in India under the PLI scheme for bulk should do well in coming years because the direct indirect support from the government and assurance by government that any point of time in future, of course, there is no written assurance, but there is a verbal assurance by the government that in case any unhealthy competition takes place for these products, the companies selected under PLI, probably government would not be found wanting in introducing anti-dumping duties, which they were a failure. I mean, they failed to do so during early 2000s and allowed the domestic fermentation-based industry to die.